Have you ever looked into your own mother's eyes and seen absolutely nothing looking back? Not anger. Not disappointment. Nothing. Like you were a stranger sitting in the wrong chair at the wrong table in the wrong house. Like the fact that you existed at all was some kind of inconvenience she couldn't figure out how to fix. I'm standing in my mother's dining room. It's her 60th birthday. There are 32 people here, cousins, church friends, neighbors she's known for decades. The table is set with her good china, the kind she only brings out when she wants people to see a certain version of her life. There are white peonies in cut glass vases. A 3-tier cake with buttercream rosettes. And me, standing 6 feet from the head of the table, holding a stack of yellowed letters tied with kitchen string. My mother's face has gone the color of old paper. Her mouth is open but nothing is coming out. And the room is so quiet I can hear the ice shifting in someone's sweet tea glass across the table. I'm not yelling. I'm not shaking. I'm not crying. I'm perfectly still. And that's what's scaring her. Because every other time in my life, she expected me to be the one who folds. The one who backs down. The one who disappears quietly so she can keep pretending. Not tonight. But this moment didn't come out of nowhere. To understand why I was standing in that dining room holding my dead aunt's letters in front of my mother's birthday guests, I need to take you back 22 years. Back to the summer I turned 14. The summer my mother decided I didn't exist anymore. My name is Corinne. I grew up in Covington, Louisiana, a quiet town about 45 minutes north of New Orleans, the kind of place where everybody goes to the same 3 churches, shops at the same Winn-Dixie, and knows whose marriage is falling apart before the couple does. My father, Dale, was a pipe fitter who worked offshore 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Gentle man. Big hands, soft voice. Never raised it at anyone. My mother, Vivian, was the woman every other woman in Covington either admired or was quietly afraid of. She ran the church fundraiser. She organized the neighborhood Christmas party. She kept the house looking like a magazine spread. And she controlled every single thing that happened inside it. For the first 13 years of my life, I thought we were a normal family. Good, even. My mother braided my hair before school. She packed my lunch with little notes tucked inside the napkin. She sat in the front row at my piano recitals and clapped like I'd played Carnegie Hall. I have pictures from those years where she's looking at me like I'm the best thing she ever made. And then I turned 14. And everything stopped. It wasn't a fight. There was no argument. No moment I can point to and say, that's where it broke. It was like waking up one morning and realizing the temperature in the house had dropped 20 degrees overnight, and I was the only one shivering. She stopped braiding my hair. Stopped packing my lunch. Stopped coming to my recitals. When I walked into a room, she walked out of it. When I spoke at dinner, she looked at my father like I hadn't said anything. And the first time I noticed a photo missing from the hallway, a framed picture of me at my 8th grade dance, I thought maybe she'd moved it. She hadn't moved it. She'd thrown it away. I found it 2 days later in the garbage can behind the garage. The glass was cracked, and my face had been cut out of the picture with scissors. Not ripped, cut. Carefully. Deliberately. Like she'd sat down and taken her time removing me from my own memory. I stood in that alley behind the garage holding that picture frame, and I remember thinking, what did I do? I asked my father that night. He was sitting on the back porch smoking a cigarette, something he only did when Vivian was asleep and the house was dark. I sat next to him and held up the picture frame with the hole where my face used to be and said, Daddy, why does Mama hate me? He didn't answer for a long time. He just stared at the yard. Then he took the frame out of my hands, set it face down on the porch rail, and said, She doesn't hate you, baby. She's fighting something that has nothing to do with you. And that was it. He went inside. And I sat on that porch alone, 14 years old, trying to figure out how something that had nothing to do with me could feel like it was destroying me. Over the next few weeks, more things disappeared. A ribbon I'd won at a swim meet. A birthday card my grandmother had given me with a photo of the two of us on the front. A painting I'd made in art class that had been hanging on the refrigerator for 2 years. One by one, every visible trace of me was being removed from the house, not all at once, but steadily, like someone slowly emptying a room they were planning to seal shut. I didn't know the answer then. It would take me 20 years to find it. And when I did, it wasn't my face she was cutting out of those photos. It was someone else's. Someone who'd been dead since 1989. But I didn't know that yet. None of us did. And that's when everything I thought I understood about my mother started to collapse, slowly at first, and then all at once. By the time I was 15, my bedroom had been moved. Not to a different room upstairs, to the back of the house. A converted storage space next to the water heater. My old room became Vivian's craft room. She never crafted a single thing in it. But I wasn't allowed back in there. When I asked my father why, he rubbed the back of his neck the way he always did when he was about to say something he didn't believe, and said, "Your mama just needs her space, baby." Her space. In my room. With my window and my closet and the ceiling I used to stare at when I couldn't sleep. That was her space now. I stopped asking questions after that. Not because I didn't have them, I had hundreds, but because every time I asked, my father's face did this thing. This crumbling. Like he wanted to tell me something but couldn't. Like there was a wall inside him he'd been told never to climb over. High school became a performance. I smiled. I got straight A's. I joined the swim team. I told myself that if I was just good enough, just excellent enough, she'd come back. The mother from the piano recitals. The one with the lunch notes and the braids. She was in there somewhere. I just had to earn her back. Junior year, I was nominated for a regional science award. I came home with the letter and put it on the kitchen counter where she'd see it. The next morning, the letter was gone. Not moved to a drawer. Not pinned to the fridge. Gone. I found it torn in half at the bottom of the recycling bin, underneath a cereal box. My father found the pieces before the recycling went out. He taped the letter back together, drove to the post office, and mailed the acceptance form himself. He never told Vivian. And I never told him I saw him do it. Senior year, I got a full academic scholarship to LSU. The letter came addressed to me. Vivian opened it, she opened all the mail, and I found it in the kitchen trash under a pile of wet coffee grounds. This time, it was my father who fished it out. He photocopied it at the library, mailed the original back with my acceptance, and kept the copy in his glove compartment. I know because I found it there 3 years later, creased and faded, tucked behind his registration. On move-in day at LSU, my mother stayed home. My father loaded the car alone. He drove me the 70 miles to Baton Rouge, carried my boxes up 3 flights of stairs, sat on the edge of my dorm bed, and cried without making a sound. Then he hugged me, said, "You're gonna be just fine," and drove back to Covington. Vivian told the neighbors I'd chosen to leave. She told the church ladies I was doing my own thing now. She told Aunt Margaux, her oldest friend, the woman who'd known her since they were both 12, that I'd pulled away. Like I was the one who left. Like the scissors were in my hand. Aunt Margaux. I need to tell you about Margaux, because she becomes important later. Margaux Thibodeau had been Vivian's best friend since middle school. She was at our house for every holiday, every birthday, every crisis. She watched me grow up. She watched me disappear. And for years, she said nothing. Not one word. She just sat at our kitchen table, drinking Vivian's coffee, watching a 14-year-old girl get hollowed out piece by piece, and kept her mouth shut. I used to be angry at Margaux for that. I'm not anymore. Because I eventually learned what she was carrying. And it was heavier than silence. There was one Thanksgiving, I was maybe 16, when Margaux came over early to help Vivian cook. I was setting the table, and Margaux looked at me for a long time. Not the way other adults looked at me, with vague politeness or distracted friendliness. She looked at me like she was studying something. Like she was comparing. Then she turned to Vivian and said, very quietly, "My God, Viv. She looks just like," and Vivian cut her off so fast it was like a slap. "Don't." One word. Margaux closed her mouth. Picked up a dish towel. And never finished that sentence. I didn't know who she was going to say I looked like. I filed it away in the part of my brain where I kept all the things about my family that didn't make sense. That file was getting thick. College was the first time I could breathe without checking who was watching. I studied civil engineering. I worked 2 jobs. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving freshman year, and Vivian didn't call to ask why. My father drove to Baton Rouge in secret, brought a Popeyes box, a bag of groceries, and an envelope with $300 cash he'd pulled from the account Vivian didn't check. He sat in my tiny apartment kitchen and we ate chicken in silence, and neither of us talked about the woman who should have been there. I graduated magna cum laude. My father was in the audience. He wore his good suit, the one he kept wrapped in a dry cleaning bag in the back of his closet. He took 14 pictures on a disposable camera. Vivian wasn't there. She told people she had a migraine. I got hired at a civil engineering firm in Baton Rouge. Good salary. Good team. I was designing drainage systems for new subdivisions, flood mitigation projects, infrastructure that would outlast me. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was building something that couldn't be thrown in the garbage. But even in Baton Rouge, even with a career and an apartment and a life that was mine, Vivian's shadow followed me. I'd be at a work dinner, and someone would ask about my family, and I'd watch myself construct this polished little answer, "Oh, my parents are in Covington, we're not super close," like it was normal. Like every other woman at that table didn't call her mother on Sundays. Like I wasn't going home to an apartment with no family photos on the walls because the only photos I had were the ones my father had secretly saved. I kept those in a shoebox under my bed. Not on display. Under the bed. Because some part of me still believed that showing my own face was dangerous. That putting myself out there, visibly, publicly, was the thing that made my mother turn away. It took me years to unlearn that. And then I met David. He was a project manager at a construction company we partnered with. Steady. Kind. The kind of man who calls when he says he'll call and shows up 10 minutes early because he doesn't want you to wait. We dated for 2 years. He proposed on the levee behind my apartment with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. I sent my mother a wedding invitation. Hand-addressed. With a handwritten note inside that said, "It would mean the world to me if you were there." She RSVP'd no. One word. A single checkbox on the response card. No note. No call. No explanation. Just, no. My father came alone. He walked me down the aisle. He danced with me to "What a Wonderful World," and held me so tight I could feel his heartbeat through his suit jacket. And at the end of the reception, when most of the guests had gone, he pulled me aside, pressed a small brass key into my palm, and said something I didn't understand for another 3 years. "Your grandmother's attic. When she passes, you go look. Don't tell your mother." His eyes were wet. His hand was shaking. And he wouldn't explain what he meant no matter how many times I asked. I didn't know it yet, but that key, that small, tarnished brass key, was going to tear my entire family apart. And put it back together in a way none of us expected. My grandmother, Lucille Delacroix, died on a Tuesday in November, 3 years after my wedding. She was 87. She went in her sleep, which was the only gentle thing that family ever gave anyone. The funeral was in Covington. I hadn't been back in 4 years. David drove. I sat in the passenger seat holding the brass key my father had given me, running my thumb along the teeth like a rosary. I hadn't told David what it was for yet. I wasn't sure I wanted to know myself. At the funeral, Vivian stood at the front of the church in a black dress that looked like it cost more than the casket. She greeted every guest. She accepted every condolence. She cried at exactly the right moments. And when I walked in, her own daughter, at her own mother's funeral, she looked at me the way you'd look at someone who showed up at the wrong service. A polite, empty nod. Then she turned to the next person. My father found me in the parking lot afterward. He looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Did you bring the key?" I nodded. "Go tonight. After everyone leaves." That night, after the repast, after the cousins drifted home and the casserole dishes were washed and Vivian had gone to bed with a glass of wine and a Xanax, I drove to my grandmother's house. It was empty now. Dark. The porch light was burned out. I let myself in with the spare key that had been under the same ceramic frog for 40 years. The attic stairs were behind a door in the hallway closet. I climbed them in the dark, using my phone as a flashlight. The attic smelled like dust and cedar and old perfume, the kind my grandmother used to wear, the kind I could still smell on her pillowcase when I was little and she'd let me sleep in her bed. In the far corner, behind a stack of Christmas decorations and a box of my grandfather's old work boots, there was a cedar chest. Small. Maybe 2 feet wide. Locked with a brass latch. The key fit. Inside the chest, there were 23 letters. All handwritten. All addressed to the same person, Elise. I didn't know who Elise was. I'd never heard that name in my family. Not once. Not at any holiday, any dinner, any family reunion. Whoever Elise was, she had been completely erased from the Delacroix family history. The letters were written in my mother's handwriting. I recognized it immediately, the same sharp, slanted cursive she used on grocery lists and Christmas cards. But the tone was nothing like the woman I knew. These letters were desperate. Pleading. Broken. The first letter was dated 1992, 3 years after Elise died. It started with, "I dreamed about you again last night. You were sitting in the passenger seat, and I was reaching for you, and you kept saying, 'Slow down, Viv. Please slow down.' I woke up and my pillow was soaked." The fifth letter talked about the night itself. How the rain was coming down in sheets. How Elise had tried to take the keys. How Vivian had laughed and said, "You worry too much." The 11th letter talked about the cover-up, how their father had called a family friend at the sheriff's department, how they'd moved Elise's body to the driver's side before the paramedics arrived, how Vivian's broken collarbone was attributed to the passenger side impact. Every letter was a confession. Every letter was addressed to a dead girl who would never read it. I sat on the attic floor, my back against the cedar chest, and read all 23. Elise was my mother's younger sister. She died in 1989 in a car accident on Highway 21, just outside Covington. She was 17. The official story, the one the family told, the one the police report reflected, was that Elise had been driving. That she'd lost control on a curve. That it was a single-car accident on a rainy night. But that wasn't what happened. Not according to these letters. According to my mother's own handwriting, in letters she wrote to her dead sister over the course of 20 years, Vivian was driving. She was 19. She'd been drinking at a crawfish boil at a friend's house. Elise begged her not to drive. Vivian told her to shut up and get in. Elise got in. The car hit a live oak tree at 50 miles an hour. Vivian walked away with a broken collarbone. Elise died at the scene. And the family, my grandmother, my grandfather, Vivian's parents, told the police that Elise had been behind the wheel. They cleaned up the story. They buried the truth with the body. And they never spoke Elise's name again. My hands were shaking so hard the paper was vibrating. But it was the 14th letter that broke me open. Because that was the one where Vivian wrote about me. She's 14 now and I can't look at her anymore. She has Elise's face. The same jaw. The same eyes. The same way of tilting her head when she's listening. Every time I see her, I see the girl I killed sitting across from me at the dinner table. I know it's not her fault. But I can't stop it. I can't breathe when she's in the room. I read that paragraph 4 times. Then I put the letter down, walked to the attic window, and stood there for I don't know how long, looking out at the street where my mother grew up. The street where Elise grew up. The street where a family decided that a dead girl's reputation was less important than a living girl's secret. My mother didn't hate me because of anything I did. She hated me because of what I look like. Because my face is a ghost that walks into her kitchen every morning and reminds her of the worst thing she's ever done. She didn't cut me out of those photos because she didn't love me. She cut me out because every photograph of me was a photograph of the sister she killed. And nobody told me. Not my father. Not my grandmother. Not Aunt Margaux. For 20 years, they all watched me twist myself into knots trying to earn back a love I never lost, a love that was stolen from me by something that happened 6 years before I was born. Before I tell you what happened next, if you're new here, this channel collects real stories from online forums and Reddit, and we take a close look at the psychology behind the people in them. If that's something that speaks to you, I'd love for you to subscribe. Now, back to where we were. I drove back to Baton Rouge that night with the letters on the passenger seat. David was asleep when I got home. I sat at the kitchen table until 4 in the morning, reading and rereading, and by the time the sun came up, I wasn't sad anymore. I was done. The next morning, I called Aunt Margaux. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd been waiting for this call for a long time. "You found the letters," she said. Not a question. "You knew." A long silence. Then, I was in the car behind them that night. I saw the whole thing. Margaux told me everything. The crawfish boil. The argument in the driveway. Vivian insisting she was fine to drive. Elise crying in the passenger seat. The sound of the impact, a sound Margaux said she still hears when it rains. The family meeting 2 days later where Lucille, my grandmother, told everyone what the story would be. Margaux was 18. She was terrified. She agreed to stay quiet. And she'd been carrying it for 33 years like a stone in her chest. "I should have told you," she said. "I should have told you 10 years ago." "You're going to get a chance to make that right," I said. Vivian's 60th birthday was 8 weeks away. She'd been planning it for months, a sit-down dinner at the house, catered, with 30-plus guests. Every important person in her social world would be there. The church friends. The garden club. The neighbors who thought she was a saint. This was Vivian's coronation. Her moment to stand at the center of her carefully constructed life and be admired. I bought a plane ticket. I made copies of every letter. I asked Margaux to write a statement, in her own words, signed and notarized, confirming what she saw that night. She did it within a week. Her hands were shaking when she handed it to me, but her voice was steady. "I'm tired of carrying it," she said. "I'm ready." I spent the next 6 weeks preparing. Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, methodical way that would have surprised anyone who knew me as the girl who always backed down. I organized the letters chronologically. I highlighted the key passages. I put Margaux's notarized statement in a separate envelope. I wrote a timeline on a legal pad, every date, every lie, every moment Vivian had erased me, traced back to the single night in 1989 that started all of it. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth to walk into that dining room and sit down at the table, uninvited, the same way I'd been uninvited from my own family for 22 years. I didn't tell my father. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I knew that if I told him, he'd try to stop me. He'd say something like, "Let it go, baby. It won't change anything." And he'd be wrong. Because this wasn't about changing Vivian. This was about the truth finally having a seat at the table. But none of that prepared me for what was waiting inside that dining room on the night of my mother's 60th birthday. I didn't call ahead. I didn't RSVP. I drove from the airport in a rental car, wearing a dress Vivian had never seen, carrying a tote bag with 23 photocopied letters and one notarized statement inside it. When I walked through the front door, Vivian was standing near the dining room holding a glass of white wine, mid-laugh, telling some story to a cluster of women from her garden club. She saw me and the laugh died in her throat like someone had pulled the plug on a radio. Her glass tilted slightly. A single drop of wine hit the hardwood floor. Corinne. She said my name like it was a word she hadn't used in months. Which, honestly, it probably was. Happy birthday, Mama. I could feel every pair of eyes in that room land on me. Some of these people hadn't seen me in years. A few of them probably didn't recognize me. Vivian had been so thorough in her erasure that some of her friends didn't even know she had a daughter. I'd heard that from a cousin once, that Vivian had introduced herself at a charity luncheon as a mother of none. Those words lived in my chest like a splinter I couldn't reach. The room had that specific kind of quiet that happens when everyone can tell something is about to go wrong but nobody wants to be the first to acknowledge it. 32 people. Catered dinner. The good china. White peonies in cut glass vases. Everything perfect. Everything controlled. Vivian's entire world, arranged exactly the way she wanted it. I walked to the head of the table. I set my tote bag on the chair. And I pulled out the stack of letters, the originals, not the copies. 23 letters, tied with the same piece of kitchen string my grandmother had used to bind them. Mama, I said, loud enough for the room to hear but calm enough that no one could call it a scene. I found these in Grandma Lucille's attic. They're letters you wrote. To your sister Elise. The room shifted. People looked at each other. I could see the confusion. Most of these people had never heard the name Elise. Vivian had spent 35 years making sure of that. Vivian's face went from surprise to recognition to something I'd never seen before, raw, animal fear. Not anger. Fear. Her fingers tightened around the wine glass stem until her knuckles went white. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. But her voice cracked on the last word. I picked up the 14th letter. The one about me. I unfolded it slowly and read one passage aloud. Just one. The passage about not being able to look at me because I have Elise's face. The passage about seeing the girl she killed sitting across from her at the dinner table. I didn't read it with anger. I read it the way you'd read a eulogy, steady, measured, letting the words land where they needed to land. And when I finished, I set the letter down on the table between the buttered dish and the basket of dinner rolls, and I waited. Vivian's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Those were private. You had no right. Private? I said. You erased me from this family for 22 years because you couldn't face what you did. You threw away my school letters. You skipped my wedding. You moved me into a storage room. You cut my face out of photographs. And you let me believe, for my entire life, that it was my fault. That I'd done something wrong. That I wasn't enough. Corinne, stop. Not here. Not here? I looked around the room. You mean not in front of the people who think you're perfect? Not in front of the women you eat lunch with and tell stories to about your ungrateful daughter who pulled away? That's when Margaux stood up. She'd been sitting at the far end of the table, and I hadn't even seen her when I walked in. But she was there. She'd come because I asked her to. And she rose from her chair like a woman putting down a weight she'd been holding for 3 decades. She's telling the truth, Viv. Margaux's voice was shaking but her eyes were dry. I was there that night. I was in the car behind you. Elise wasn't driving. You were. And we all agreed to say otherwise. Your mama, your daddy, me. We all lied. And this girl, she pointed at me, this girl has been paying for it her whole life. The room didn't gasp. That's something movies get wrong. In real life, when the truth lands, the real, ugly, undeniable truth, people don't gasp. They go still. They look down. They study their napkins and their water glasses and the pattern on the tablecloth, because looking at the person who's been caught is too uncomfortable. My father put down his napkin. He pushed his chair back. He stood up, walked around the table, and came to stand beside me. He didn't say a word. He just stood there. And that was enough. Vivian sank into her chair. Not dramatically, slowly, like air leaving a tire. Her wine glass was still in her hand. She looked at the letters on the table. She looked at Margaux. She looked at Dale. And then she looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time since I was 13 years old, and what I saw in her face wasn't rage. It wasn't denial. It was the expression of someone who's been running from something for 35 years and just felt it catch up. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She just sat there. And one by one, the guests began to stand, collect their things, and walk toward the door. No one said goodbye to Vivian. A few of them touched my arm as they passed. One woman, someone I'd never met, squeezed my hand and whispered, "I'm sorry, sweetheart." I left the letters on the table. I walked out with my father on one side and David on the other, and I didn't look back. That was 6 months ago. My father filed for legal separation in January. He told me on the phone that the morning after the birthday dinner, he woke up, looked at Vivian sleeping next to him, and realized he had spent 35 years married to a woman who had punished their daughter for a crime she committed before that daughter was born. He said he sat on the edge of the bed for 20 minutes. Then he packed a suitcase, put it in the truck, and drove to a rental house in Mandeville, 20 minutes from my grandmother's old place. He's been there ever since. He looks lighter. Younger, even. He comes to Baton Rouge every other weekend and has dinner with me and David and our daughter, Elise. We named her Elise. Vivian called me once, about 3 weeks after the birthday. I picked up. She was silent for 10 seconds. Then she said, "You had no right to do that to me." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Can we talk?" Not, "I was wrong." Just, "You had no right." I told her she was correct. I didn't have the right. Elise had the right. And since Elise couldn't be there to use it, I used it for her. Then I hung up. She hasn't called since. Vivian's 60th birthday was the last event she hosted. The garden club stopped meeting at her house. The church committee found a new organizer. The neighbors still wave, but they don't stop. She is learning what it feels like to be the one who disappears. Aunt Margaux and I talk every Sunday. She sends my daughter birthday cards with $5 bills tucked inside. She tells me stories about the real Elise, the one Vivian tried to erase. Elise who loved pelicans. Elise who made the best king cake on the block. Elise who would have been 52 this year and would have been the kind of aunt who teaches you to fish and lets you stay up past your bedtime. Last month, I drove to the cemetery where Elise is buried. It's a small plot in a churchyard outside Covington, no headstone, just a flat marker in the grass. I brought a bouquet of magnolias and a framed copy of the photograph Vivian cut me out of when I was 14. I placed it against the marker and sat there for a while, looking at the face my mother couldn't stand to see. My face. Elise's face. The same jaw. The same eyes. And you know what? I felt something I hadn't felt since I was 13 years old. I felt seen. Here's what I've come to understand about my mother, and about people like her. She didn't destroy me because she was cruel. She destroyed me because every time she looked at me, she had to face the thing she'd spent her whole life running from. I was walking, breathing evidence of what she did. And instead of facing that guilt, instead of telling the truth and letting the weight of it break her open so she could heal, she chose to break me instead. She made me the container for her shame. She poured 35 years of guilt into a child who didn't understand why her mother stopped loving her, and she sealed the lid and walked away. And the family, the grandmother who hid the letters, the father who knew but couldn't speak, the best friend who watched from the next table, they all became part of the silence. Not because they were bad people. But because silence is easier than truth when the truth means admitting you helped cover up the worst night of someone's life. Silence starts as protection and becomes a prison, and after long enough, nobody remembers how to unlock the door. I'm standing in my kitchen now. It's a Sunday morning. David is making pancakes. My daughter is in her high chair, smashing banana slices with her fist and laughing about it. And on the wall behind me, framed in simple black wood, are 23 letters written by a woman who couldn't look at me, next to a photograph of a 17-year-old girl who looked just like me and never got to grow up. That photograph used to be in a garbage can. Now it's in a frame. And every morning, when I walk past it with my coffee, I stop. I look at Elise's face. And I look at mine. And I think, we both deserved better. But at least one of us got the chance. If this story stayed with you, I want you to know, it's real. We collect these stories from online forums, reshape them for privacy, and look at the psychology behind the people in them. If that's something that matters to you, I'd love for you to subscribe to Revenge Stories. Your support helps us keep bringing these stories to light. And if you're still here, still listening, I appreciate you more than you know. There are more stories waiting for you right now on your screen, stories about people who were pushed to the edge by the ones who were supposed to love them, and how they found their way back. I'll see you in the next one.